Hey guys, welcome back to Planet Mithril Paints, and today we are painting another model which has been highly requested on the channel. We are painting the rank and file, the backbone legion of Sauron's hordes, the Morannon Orcs. Beautiful models, lovely plastic sculpts, look great on the battlefield when they're all together, all ranked up and ready to take on the free kingdoms of the people in Middle-earth. We'll be showing you how to paint them from start to finish, all their armour, all their cloth, as well as touching on a couple of different ways you can paint their orcish flesh at the end of the video as well. These will all be explored a bit later on in depth in other videos, but we will just briefly give you a very quick rundown of the paints we used and some pictures as well. So as always, we cleaned and prepped our model by getting rid of all the mould lines and trimming off any flash. We then assembled the model to the base using the slaughter peg and some plastic glue, whereupon the base was covered in fine modelling sand, and finally the model was primed in Chaos Black undercoat. We hope you enjoy our Morannon Orc tutorial today, and we hope it helps you get your legions of orcs on the tabletop ready for battle. But without further delay, please sit back, relax and enjoy the video. First, we're going to use a mix of Death Corpse Drab and Rhinoxide and base coat the face and the hands gripping the weapons. Make sure we get all underneath the jowls and the bottom of his chin, just to get nice even coverage throughout. Now we're going to use a mix of Lead Belcher, toned down with some Abaddon Black, and base coat all the armour and metalwork around the model. The armour and metalwork take up about 75% of the model overall, so make sure we get all these areas covered nice and smoothly. All the armour plating, the spear tip, as well as the outer rim of the shield. Now we're going to mix some corn red with some Rhinoxide and apply this as a base coat to all the cloth. This includes the skirt down the back, as well as the legs and ankles, and the cloth around the upper arms. There will be some cloth around the elbows and the boots. We can leave these black for now, as we'll be painting these a different colour a bit later on. Now we're going to start adding some Messy Desert to our original Death Corpse Drab Rhinoxide mix, and we're going to apply this as another layer all over all the orc skin. We will show you at the end of the video how to make different varieties of orc skin, but for this guy we're making him a nice standard green looking orc. We want to bring the tone up naturally with the Messy Desert rather than make it too bright too early with lighter greens. Now we're going to apply a wash with Athonian Camo Shade, thinned down with Lamy Medium, and apply this all over the skin. Once the wash is dry, we're going to relayer, adding a little bit more Messy Desert to the mix. This will bring it to an approximate split of 50-50 Messy Desert and the original green-brown mix. Now we can focus on picking out some of the facial details and the fingers and thumb, leaving the wash showing in the recesses and the gaps between the fingers. Now we're going to start adding Ogreen Camo to the original layer mix, and as we did before, just apply this as a highlight all over the face and the fingers, leaving the wash and previous layers showing by keeping our highlights tighter and thinner and focusing on more of the pronounced facial and hand detail. Once you're happy with how the layers look, you can apply a very fine edge highlight of pure Ogreen Camo just to pick out the most pronounced and upper areas of facial detail, as well as the knuckles and tips of the fingers. Now we're going to use Rakarth Flesh and a mix of Abaddon Black and Zemesi Desert for all the facial detail. With the Abaddon Black, we want to carefully paint in the eye sockets situated within the helm. And then with Zemesi Desert, just finish off the eye effect by applying 2 pinpoint dots either side of the black to create the pupils. And then with Rakarth Flesh, carefully pick out the teeth in its mouth. Now we're going to apply a wash to the armour with a mix of Agrax Earthshade, thinned down again with Lamia Medium, and we're going to apply this as a thorough wash over all the metalwork and all the armour plating. Be careful not to let this pool, as any unsightly blemishes will look a little bit unnatural later on, so keep your wash nice and consistent throughout so it dries naturally and gives a really nice beaten, rusted appearance when dry. Once that wash is dry, we're going to use Nuln Oil, again thinned down with Lamia Medium, and we're going to tone down all the armour now to a more orcish look by applying this as another wash over the top. It can be a little bit more sparse with this one because we don't want to undo the rusted look of the Agrax, but just make sure we get all the armour areas covered with this wash before moving on to the next stage. Now we're going to use a mix of Leadbelcher and Pallid Witch Flesh, and this is the painstaking part of these models. We're going to very carefully and very precisely highlight all the edges on all the metalwork and armour plating. This is quite a time consuming and quite a precise part of this model, so take your time and take regular breaks if you need to. We just want to make sure we get all that sharpness as inherent of orc armour, while not bringing the tone of the armour up too much by adding a lighter silver instead of the Pallid Witch Flesh. Finally, once you're happy with how your orc looks, we're going to apply a very sporadic wash with Athonian Camo Shade mixed with some Agrax Earthshade and thin with Lamia Medium, and apply this just in random patches around the armour just to give it that little bit more orcish feel. We're going to layer over all the cloth now using pure corn red. You might want to apply this in a couple of thin coats just to get a nice smooth consistent finish over all the cloth areas. Now we're going to use Carabao Crimson, thinned down again with Lamia Medium, and apply a nice light wash over all these red cloth areas. Keep this wash nice and thin, we just want it to pool in the recesses and avoid it pooling too much on the upper areas, which will give it a nice natural look once dry. Now we're going to layer over with a mix of corn red and Wazdaka red, and we're going to carefully layer this over all the red cloth, leaving the Carabao Crimson showing in the deepest recesses between all the cloth folds. There's quite a lot of defined cloth on these models, so working out where this needs to go won't be too challenging. And just leave the most defined recesses still showing the Carabao Crimson from the previous stage. Now we're going to layer over it again with pure Wazdaka red, keeping our highlights thinner and tighter than the previous layer stage, showing the Wazdaka and the Carabao Crimson showing underneath, creating a nice transition from the darker recessed areas of cloth to the lighter areas we're now filling in.
Now we're going to highlight now with a mix of Wazdaka Red and Evil Sun Scarlet. And again, we're just going to trace over these Wazdaka highlights from the previous stage, keeping our highlights tighter, thinner and more precise, more targeted, to really create that natural sense of movement within the cloth material from the darker to the lighter shades. Finally, once you're happy with how your orc looks so far, add some Troll Slayer Orange to the previous Wazdaka Red Evil Sun Scarlet mix and just apply a very fine highlight just to the outermost edges and curls of material, just to highlight where the light would be bouncing off the most prominent curls and folds of cloth more prominently. Now we're going to use a mix of Skaven Black Dinge, Rhinox Hide, toned down with a little bit of Abaddon Black, and we're just going to base coat the remaining cloth areas with this mix. This includes all the cloth around the elbows, as well as the front and the heels of the boots, and any cloth within the arm gauntlets. We're going to start adding some Baneblade Brown to this previous base coat mix now, and apply an all over layer, just to bring up the tone of the grey nicely and naturally, and give it that almost browny, dirty look which is synonymous with orcs. Now we're going to apply a quick wash with Agrax Earthshade thinned down significantly with Lamia Medium. Increase the amount of Baneblade Brown in the previous mix for the first layer stage after the wash, and just frame in the next layer stage, leaving the wash showing in the recesses up against the armour and between the folds in the cloth like we did for the red. Finally, we're going to add some Karak Stone to the overall mix and just apply an edge highlight to the upper folds and creases in material, following the same practices we used for the red cloth which we've already finished. We can frame the boots and frame the toe tips as well, just to finish off all our cloth detailing. We can use a mix of Steel Legion Drab and Dryad Bark now, and we're going to carefully base coat the front and reverse of the shield, as well as the spear shaft. This won't cover quite so well over the black paint, so you want to apply this in a few thin layers to get a nice even coverage. We're not using Rhinox or Pure Dryad for this, as we want to break up the wood from the belt straps and leathers a bit later on. Now we're going to start adding Karak Stone to the previous base coat mix, and with the front of the shield we want to carefully pick out the bulk of the wood panelling, leaving the previous base coat showing in the deepest recesses where the wood segments. Again, a couple of thin coats will give you a nice smooth finish down all the bulk of the panelling. Now we're going to apply a very diluted mix of Agrax Earthshade thinned down with Lamia Medium and just tone the wood and give it that slightly beaten, slightly old and aged look, again which is synonymous with the ill-kept weapons of the orcs. For the final highlight stage we're going to add Screaming Skulls to the previous layer mix and very carefully frame all the edges of the wood panelling either side, as well as draw your paint in nice, thin, targeted lines down the front of the shield to create a wood grain effect, as well as doing the same to the spear as well to create that wood grain effect down the shaft. Now we're going to use Rhinox hide and just very carefully fill in all the belts and straps all over the orc, including down the back of the legs, the waist and around the arms. Using a mix of Rhinox hide and Baneblade brown now, we're just going to layer over all these straps just to bring up the tone a little bit more naturally between the base layer and the highlight in a second. Finally, we're going to edge highlight all the belts and straps now using pure Baneblade brown. Give a nice tip to your brush to make sure the highlight goes exactly where you want it to go and doesn't bleed out into the other areas of the model. Now we're going to use Skaven Black Dinge and just very carefully paint in any hair that is featured on the model. The hair was then given a very light wash with some Nuln oil. Finally, we're going to use Dawnstone now and just very carefully pick out the individual hairs and give them all a little bit of a highlight. The base sand was dry brushed in 3 stages, starting off with Rhinox hide. This was then dry brushed over the top with Gorthor brown. And finally a very light dusting of Pallid Witch flesh applied over the top. We applied Mordian corpse grass to the base in a few sporadic clumps just to give it that bit more of a Pelennor Fields feel. Finally, the model was affixed to a freestanding surface and we very carefully painted a solid line of dry bark around the rim of the base to finish off on Morannon Orc. And there we have it, the Morannon Orc, the first of the Legion, ready to unleash Sauron's will upon the free peoples of Middle-earth. The skin for this orc here was painted from a Steel Legion drab Rhinox hide base mix, layered up through Talon sand, washed with Agrax, and highlighted up all the way to pure Talon to give it a bit more tanned and a bit more yellowy putrid look. The skin of this orc here was painted with a Doomball and Rhinox hide mix, and was layered and highlighted up by adding Tuskor fur over an Agrax Earthshade wash until it was highlighted up to pure Tuskor fur for that slightly more red, slightly pinkish and slightly more brutish appeal. We'll explore these flesh tones a little bit more in detail in other videos, but we wanted to give you a rundown of just all the variations of orc skin you could give to your Morannon army to really give them the character they deserve.